I'm broadcasting now.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. We're going to give it just a couple minutes to let everyone jump on, and we'll get started in just 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, I think we can go ahead and kick things off since we're a couple minutes past the hour here. Thank you all for joining us. We're here today to talk about why donor retention matters now more than ever. I know you all are probably at home sitting on your couches or kitchen chairs like I am, so we really appreciate you making the time to be here. Dan and I will introduce ourselves in just a moment, but first, we're here to represent Media Cause. So Media Cause is a full service digital agency meant to achieve a greater good. So we work with organizations across the country focused on the 5 forces for change, which we believe are branding, marketing, advocacy, fundraising, and technology. And we help organizations build their digital infrastructure to achieve their missions. So I'm Elise Walnut. I'm the Director of Strategy here at Media Cause. I've spent most of my career in-house at various nonprofits. I started off in Denver, where I grew up, and moved to the DC area in 2014 to join Amnesty International on the advocacy communication side of things. And then most recently built the Nature Conservancy's digital donor acquisition program. And I'm here with Dan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for hopping on today. My name is Dan Reed. I'm the Senior Fundraising Director here at Media Cause. Prior to that, I spent a number of years in-house as well. Most recently, I was the Director of Digital Fundraising and Engagement at World Food Program USA. And prior to that, I spent some time at the Smithsonian Institution. And a little bit before that, I was at a smaller men's health nonprofit where I'm from in Chicago. And so anyways, thank you all for joining us. We think this will be a very useful session for everybody. This is us actually during social isolation. This is me on the left looking longingly out the window now that we're in lockdown here in Maryland, and Elise on the right up to what she's used to in her lockdown as well.
Yes, coffee and wine all around. But yeah, we're here today. We know that 2020 has been unexpected for a lot of us in a lot of different ways. So we're here to give you some advice on donor retention, set the stage for the year that's to come. And if you have any questions as we go along, you can drop them into the chat box and we will answer them as the presentation wraps up.
Right, so as Elise said, first we'll get into setting the stage and we'll talk through what it means to kind of find your footing during these very uncertain times. And then we'll go through some tips and tricks and different ideas that we have around donor retention. And of course, any questions that you all would like to ask, please do so. So first things first, wanted to take a look at two different scenarios related to the COVID-19 crisis. In scenario one, it would be called a prolonged contraction, and the keys here are that there is a delayed testing and weak adaptation of social distancing, and of course, in this scenario, the epidemic doesn't peak until later in May. The virus is not seasonal, and which would create a longer tail throughout the course of 2020. And the knock-on economic effects would, of course, be that demand would suffer, and most notable here is that the ongoing effects of the recession would continue to exacerbate throughout the course of 2020, and the global economic impact is ultimately very severe, approaching that close to 2008 and 2009. And in this scenario, GDP contracts significantly, and the recovery does not begin until Q2 of 2021. And so scenario two is a delayed recovery, and in this scenario, the cases peak in mid-April. In this scenario too, the outbreak is under control by the end of Q2, but the self-reinforcing dynamics of recession still do kick in and create that slump into Q3. It takes until Q4 for Europe and US economies to see a genuine recovery. And in this scenario, 2020 global GDP in 2020 would fall slightly. And so why does this matter? So when we look back throughout the course of giving in the United States, giving has increased in current dollars every year since 1977. And there are three exceptions in years 1987, 2008, and 2009. And prior to the years, the 40-year period between 77 and 2017, overall giving was consistent, was at or above 2% of GDP. It had fallen slightly during the 70s, 80s, and 90s, but in the mid to late 90s increased and fell and rose above 2%. It then dropped, of course, following 2008 and 2009, between 2009 to 2011, down to 1.9%. So when we look more deeply at this into the past, and on the left, you'll find total US giving between 1969 and 2011. But on the right, you'll see the total US food bank donations between 2007 and 2009. And so the point here is that the economic recession, the recession years forces donors to make different choices, not only as far as how much they can give, but where they might send their gift. And so to illustrate that, this was a survey done in 2016. It asked donors to choose their top three most important challenges, or I'm sorry, challenges, the top three challenges donors see as the most important for the society to address in the future. And at the top, develop treatment or cures for diseases, hunger and access to nutritious food, and access to basic health services. Then down at the bottom, you'll find things like access and opportunity for higher ed, preservation and advancement of arts and culture, the expanding opportunities for women and girls, and access to opportunities for racial and cultural minorities. It's important for people in your place who to know where their mission falls against other organizations. So when we think about retention in this way, what typically an organization would do as part of their retention audit would be to conduct what's called a pest analysis. And a pest analysis is an analysis that looks for external factors that will likely have an impact on your ability to retain your donors. And so they're divided into four groups: political factors, so federal and state legislative changes in policy; economic factors, so fiscal changes, inflation, interest rates, the growth, and of course the decline in the economy, the level of unemployment; sociocultural factors, demographic patterns and trends, and the societal concern for your particular cause. Those are obviously shifting around. And similarly to the technological factors, the development of new digital media, trends in internet usage and penetration, of course, the always present costs of doing business, the organizational infrastructure costs. So it's important for us to think through what these various factors are and how they are impacting your ability to retain your particular donors. And I think what's interesting for me during the context of all of this is that all of these factors are being upended in significant ways when we consider, of course, the political actions that have taken place recently, the economic factors that we're all still very concerned about. Demographically, when we think about our donors and the type of donors that we typically have, these folks are also at risk. And of course, the societal concern for your particular cause might be thrown by the wayside right now as as the world's attention is turned to the COVID-19 virus. So, and lastly, here on the technological factors, I think it's important for us to understand too what the way in which the world is currently using the internet, in the sense that we are in a world where the whole world is essentially grounded. And so we do have internet access. And so that what we see across a number of clients is visitorship for particular aspects of their programming going up. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that means in terms of content going forward. This is a chart to illustrate the impact of the importance rather of retention over a longer period of time. So in this hypothetical scenario, organization 1 versus organization 2, a 10% improvement in attrition rate can equate to a 50% increase in revenue over a 10-year period. And so in order for organization 2 to maintain the same number of donors and revenue as organization 1, it must work twice as hard and spend much, much more on acquisition. So all that's to say, your ability to retain your donors in years 1, 2, and 3 are going to have significant outcomes for years 8, 9, and 10. And so the idea here is that donor retention right now is not only important in the short term, in the sense that you want to keep your donors through this particular crisis, but your ability to keep them during this particular crisis, or your inability to not to, is going to have a knock-on effect in the later years. As you know, as the donors drop off the file now, they may never come back. So retaining them now is very critical. I'm going to hand things over to Elise now to talk through finding your footing in times of uncertainty.
Yeah. So on those lighthearted notes, we're going to be talking a little bit about how you can plan, not just for this moment, but the moments to come in 2020, because the reality is that we're just at the beginning of this year. We have a lot more to go of 2020, and still election year is upon us. So there are a few things to consider. So first and foremost, before communicating outbound, we believe this is a good moment to look internally and to organize your key stakeholders around a few key pillars and agreements. So knowing that there will be moments that you need to act on or not act on as the year progresses, your key goals right now should be to know your audience and your ask, know your brand values and your voice, know your return, know your pivot plan, and know your segmentation strategy. And we'll get into all of those. So first up is knowing your audience and your ask. Right now, there are organizations who are different states of funding levels. Some organizations are seeing a surplus right now with COVID in play, particularly food banks and other organizations in like-minded situations. The other organizations that might be on the opposite end of the spectrum are seeing funding shortfalls. So really right now, what you need to organize your stakeholders to agree upon is what you need and what you need to collect from which donor groups to keep doing the work so that you can properly articulate your asks. Second here is really just getting in good touch with your CFO and your finance team to agree upon whether funding shortfalls need to be addressed to prioritize year one revenue and just make budget, or to acquire great donors who are going to retain better in the long run, but who might be more expensive to acquire right now. We believe that long-term value should always be your first priority, but that's an important conversation to have internally so that everyone's on the same page. Next is your asks by giving level based on history and propensity. Those should look different based on who you're talking to. And also what should look different is your outreach strategy for each of them. So agree upon who is speaking to different donor groups, whether that's your major gift officers, your digital team, your offline team, or some collection of all of those. Agree upon who's asking for what. And last, you know, we can give you as much good advice about how to communicate as we want, but the most important thing for you is to know how you'll gauge market response to your communications right now. Whether that's through social listening, monitoring your different social platforms, checking in with your member care teams to hear the feedback that donors are giving right now, and setting up search alerts in Google and the like to make sure that you're aware of how people are perceiving your communications. So next is knowing your brand values. In this moment, we've already seen that there will be plenty of opportunities to engage in different advocacy efforts that we may or may not be aware of right now. Some of them have been led by nonprofits themselves. The example to the right here are communications rallying support for inclusion of nonprofits in the CARES Act, which already happened, but there might be opportunities like this in the future where your organization could or could not have a voice. So this is a time to agree on those things so that if you do decide to enter into that, you're prepared and you know what your talking points are. Similarly, on the lead gen front, there will be opportunities to create petition content, whether that's related to politics or not. That could be a good opportunity to bring in new leads organically if you choose to pull back acquisition spend. So knowing your brand lines and the parameters for what you will and will not engage in is a good thing for everyone to agree upon now so that you can have those working conversations going. And when something happens, whether that's related to the election or something else this year, you can act quickly. And the last point here is competitor bidding. This tends to be a hot topic for nonprofits in the paid search space as to whether you'll bid on other nonprofits' brand terms. Philosophically, I think that is something that in normal times you might agree to do, but in this moment, it's good to evaluate whether you'll choose to do that, knowing that some organizations might be pulling back their advertising spend right now. So it's a good conversation to have. And next is knowing your brand voice. Really, most importantly right now, it's a good time to really lean into what works for you in normal times and to speak confidently. Most important is realizing that we are all in this situation. We are all facing a pandemic together. We're all sitting on our couches, and donors care about your mission, and reaching them with empathy and understanding will progress you further than anything else will. So first is articulating empathy and concern for them, and demonstrating calm and forward thinking, and focusing your communications on the mission and the work that needs to be done. And most importantly, how that impacts your donors and how it will make them feel to be able to empower themselves to act and to donate, rather than why you need the work or the donations as an organization. All right, and then next slide. So the leading question on this slide is whether this is the right moment to fundraise. And truthfully, this is a question we're probably likely to ask ourselves many times this year. It feels awkward and different in this moment to be out there asking for funding, and many nonprofits have asked us whether their mission takes priority. And we believe that the answer is yes, people should continue fundraising in this moment and in all the moments to come. The reality is that it goes on, and history tells us that the organizations who keep fundraising during these moments are the ones who are likely to come out ahead when recession periods end. So we believe that you should keep going out there, but should also have a pulse on how things are being received and have firm benchmarks in place that will allow you to know if you are seeing warning signs on different channels related to how your fundraising is coming across. So some of the firm benchmarks that we noted here that you should take a look at are related to the digital channels that we most often touch here at MediaCause. So those are email, ads, and your long-term metrics. So in email and advertising, you're going to want to look at the responsive metrics that will tell you short-term how things are being perceived. That's your open rate, your click rate, your conversion rate, and in advertising, your cost to acquire, your return on ad spend, and take those all by donor status so that you know if you are seeing a potential point where you should scale up or down. And ultimately what matters most are your long-term metrics, your sustainer conversion rate, your average gift amounts, and your donor retention rates, because truthfully, those all could mitigate any high costs or trouble signs that you're seeing in other channels, and could indicate that you should keep going in different channels when you might choose otherwise. So now's a moment to really make sure that you know your numbers and you know what things look like in normal moments so that you can measure against those in this moment and the ones to come. And on the same note, just knowing your metrics is half the battle. The other half is knowing what to do about them. So right now is a good moment to step back and to create a contingency plan. Work with your team to establish the answers to a few key questions. I'm sure once you convene, you'll come up with many, but we included a few example ones that we think about often here. And they are, if donor retention rate slips in one channel, which channels will make up the ground? If cost to acquire is high, where would you shift acquisition dollars? Are there ways that you can repurpose your staff to focus on retention in new ways and to cultivate audiences? And last, if you do encounter a PR or a results issue, who's the emergency contact team, and who's taking care of those things when they happen? Who's on the call thread when there's an emergency?
The other point to make too is of knowing your segmentation strategy. And so I like to think about this as a reinstatement state of mind. So the cost to renew a donor has gone up, donors giving capacity has gone down, your resources are still fixed. And so theoretically we should prioritize our segment strategies based upon recency, the time since the donor's last gift, the frequency, the number of gifts that have been given, and then the value, the amount of the gift of total gifts. And so once we've done that, we scale up our efforts within each segment while also reducing our ask amount. And there's an asterisk there because within reason, I think part of the point on this putting yourself in the reinstatement state of mind is to say within reason to trade dollars in the short term for the inertia effect of the donor continuing to give through this period. And so we assume to renew donors at an amount less than that we acquired them by, simply for the sake of renewing them and the ultimate lifetime value that they represent.
All right, so now we're going to get into some tips, tricks, and tactics. So whereas we're speaking high level previously, we'll get into some more tangible advice here. So the first section here, we believe if there's nothing else that we can tell you today, it's that you should be focusing on donor stewardship right now. This is a moment to consider deep segmentation and talking to different segments of your audience in the way that they need to be spoken to right now. The highest priority for you right now in terms of retention are your MVPs, your most valuable players. And we've categorized those as your multi-year sustainers, your mid-level groups, and higher. And for them, you want to think about investing differently because this is your most important and your most diverse group. So our number one piece of advice here is to get on the phone. Get in touch with those people, reach them with empathy and understanding. ask them how they're doing and what you can do for them first, and widen your outreach pool. So if your CEO normally only calls the donors who are giving at 10K and above, lower the threshold to $1,000 or something smaller, so that you're reaching a wider pool of people and letting those great donors know that they're important to you and that you want to continue the relationship. And be sure to ask for what you need in those conversations. Relatedly, if you are omitting any of these high value donors from your digital direct mail or telemarketing campaigns, consider folding them back in right now, because they're likely to be paying more attention, and those costs to retain them at this moment might be high, but the long-term reward is also likely high. So for the next slide, on the same token for these great donors, the next point here is providing needed relief. And for organizations who have had to cancel events, fill those funding gaps. One of the ideas that we had was to break up the boredom of this moment by planning a physical delivery or something that would surprise and delight donors by giving them something that shows up at their door. So one of the examples that we read recently was from an organization who dropped the tools for a tea kit for a 19th Amendment anniversary gala that didn't happen last summer. And they provided their donors with all the things that they needed to make a cup of tea. So the mug, the tea bag, et cetera, and an envelope that explained that at the same moment, all of these donors were going to share a cup of tea together and give online. So it gives people a tangible way to remember you, something that they'll remember probably years into the future, and gives that ask to collectively give at the same time. This is also, a side note, a great time to support your local business partnerships through doing that, if you can think creatively about how to create those engagements. Next is making it easy for your supporters to support you. Among the organizations that we've spoken to that are getting through this moment best are the ones that are able to creatively lean on peer-to-peer. So really being willing to treat your community and your supporters as brand advocates, give them a toolkit for how they can speak about you, and make it easy for them to copy and paste something into their Facebook, their Twitter, whatever it is that encourages their community to give to you. And be sure to give them ideas about who to ask. So if you're an organization that is working most often with student groups, for example, make sure you're talking to your current students, the alumni students, as well as their parents and their families, and giving them those ideas of who might be interested in supporting you. The next group are your new and low dollar donors. So these are your first year donors and donors who aren't quite at that mid-level giving range yet. So to set expectations here, this group is going to be challenging. The data tells us that in the best of times, you are only going to renew 1 in 4 of these first year donors in the first place. So know that, take that with a grain of salt and set your expectations low internally, and just choose to focus on what you can. We recommend pursuing a monthly donor appeal, making support easy, and trusting your data. So there is no better time to make donation seamless and to make sure that your mobile experience is up to par. Implement your PayPal button and make sure your Facebook donation button is active on your platforms. Similarly, you could think about matching your subsequent ask channels with the origin source that a person came in on originally. So if a person gave for the first time via Facebook, you might consider that your sustain or upgrade ask should also come via Facebook instead of email. And similarly, if a person gave for the first time via email, maybe don't spend the money to hit them with an advertising ask. See how far you can get by taking stock of those sources and arranging your investment strategy accordingly. That translates to my next point, which is to rely on your tried and true. So for this group, remember your best practices and rely on them. Be cautious with your spend until and unless the data tells you that you should do otherwise. We generally practice a rule of 80-20, where 80% of your effort should be spent on tactics that you know work, and 20% should be spent on innovation. And in moments like these, you might want to shift more to a 90-10 ratio to make sure that you are being conservative. And last here is building a fast reinstatement strategy. So the reality is that some of this segment will lapse, and when they do, and when we are through this moment economically, you want to be ready to try and re-engage them. So have those touch points ready to say, you know, once the economy rebounds, you can address when they came on, address that COVID happened, and say, you know, now that we're past this, you are important to us. Are you ready to give again? And the last group here that we'll get into is emergency donors. So for the organizations that are seeing a surplus in this moment, you could call these quote unquote emergency donors, who are historically very difficult to retain. But we believe that with some effort and some constant vigilance in data monitoring, you can give it your best shot here. So your two biggest priorities for this group are to get to know them and to create loyalty. And by getting to know them, we mean that you should seek to understand who they are in data-based ways. So you want to know if these donors are worth investing in based on how closely they resemble the rest of your file. And the best way to do that is to encourage them to tell you more about themselves. So you might want to consider sending an email deployment that looks like a fun survey or a quiz that they could take to break up some of the boredom of this moment. And it encourages them to fill in some form fields that you might not already have on file. If you need to prioritize, we suggest birth date, zip code, and telephone number so that you get information that tells you, how old these people are, what demographic they might fit, and also their telephone number gives you information so that you can cultivate them with a phone call. And on the creating loyalty note, you want to make sure that you get your donors bought in on your cause at a deep level. So make sure that they understand that the work that you do is year round. It's not just in this moment. So you want to engage with deep storytelling that puts a face to the people that you serve and the cause that you serve, and make sure that people understand the cause that they committed to so that they remember in the future.
A few more segments to think about: volunteers. So proactively bring these folks into the unique problem that you now are faced with solving. Including them in that planning process early can help create a sense of ownership in your mission, and also keep them close as you navigate, this tough stretch ahead. And so a few examples are your board members, your program volunteers, and your fundraisers. So for board members, you want to, obviously, if they're not close, get them closer. I think you want to ask them for an additional financial commitment if they haven't given one, or if they've already given one, and also to ask if they can connect you to people that might be able to give as well. For program volunteers, this is an opportunity to just keep them close, but also an opportunity to ask them to fundraise on your behalf. And for fundraisers, the ask, of course, is to ask them to fundraise, as Elise mentioned, but also to help recruit fundraisers. For monthly donors, we'd recommend that you create 2 to 3 segments within this select, splitting between the monthly gift amount, high versus low, and the recency of their first monthly gift, so high versus low, and loyalty and recently loyal. And so consider a special one-time ask for those higher level and more loyal monthly donors, or an upgrade monthly gift ask. And then be considerate with the very modest or very new monthly donors. They might be worth suppressing altogether. On the messaging front, as Elise said, don't stop fundraising. I think we want to think even more about tonality and being transparent. And definitely focus on the mission. Apply your hyper segmentation strategies with each of those unique asks that we've sort of walked through, And then, as we said, lead with empathy. It's not about you. It's about your mission. It's about your donors. And I think, again, this is giving a lot of organizations an opportunity to really be transparent, and that in of itself can be a very powerful thing to do. Your cases for support. Again, this is another opportunity to really articulate and think critically about how you're messaging and what you need. So, are you directly responding to the crisis? If so, how? And what else do you need? And if you're not, how has your organization addressed the continuity of services? Are there increased costs with your program delivery? Will there be a budget shortfall as a result of this? And if so, how does that affect your mission and specific programmatic outcomes? How critical is your mission right now? And what or who is at risk? And lastly, why is it important that your organization be sustained beyond this crisis? Can you be specific?
So our next point here is on using this moment to create meaningful content. So based on what the data is telling you, you might opt to shift funds away from acquisition spend and lean more on retention strategies that are more cost effective. And there are going to be opportunities to potentially reallocate staff time as a result of that. And to think about which channels are most critical based on the choices that you're making. So our first and foremost point here is to think about supporting search first for new and retained donors. This is not a place to cut spend. This is lowest in the funnel, where you are reaching people who already know you, who are actively engaged, and who are likely ready to give. So make sure search is supported and that you are maxing out both your ad grant spend as well as your paid search strategy with a really strong keyword and ad strategy that's robust and reviewed often. And you want to consider including custom match campaigns in your paid search strategy so that you are reaching those retained donor groups with a segmented call to action that we've already mentioned. The next thing here is keyword-rich landing pages to support search. So oftentimes landing pages are stood up quickly and might be pretty bare bones. And now's a great time to think about using some of your acquisition time, the time that your staff might have spent on acquisition, to create robust content pages that will channel people to search as well as provide you with a place to drive traffic to when times to spend are better. So you can invest team time in creating this content that will optimize you for SEO and for paid search. Similarly, on the lead generation side of things, this is a good moment to think about how you're standing up lead gen content, whether it's for partisan efforts like pledges or petitions, or for nonpartisan options like quizzes and ebooks. These type of content options are a good way to engage non-donors and to bring in newly acquired people somewhat cheaply, as well as to provide your current list with engagement opportunities that you can email out and inspire engagement in that way. So we, like we said, we believe there are plenty of options for nonpartisan lead gen content, which we're happy to speak to one-on-one after this, if so desired.
Lastly here, a few items on technology tips and best practices. Button up and revisit your marketing automation. This is an opportunity, again, to make sure you're doing the little things right. So looking at your onboard series, your welcome series, but also your goodbye series, if you don't have one in place. We've mentioned this a few times, but generally reduce the donation form friction and verify that good UX, both on desktop, but in particularly mobile. Get surgical with your match funds. Often this is a difficult for a lot of nonprofits to manage, but obviously securing match funds is already difficult, and so that's a finite resource. So as you think about who you might leverage that match fund with, consider all those segments that we've talked through. You want to use the match fund for the groups that you're most likely to renew, and the groups that are going to renew at the best value for the longer term. Data hygiene. These are little things. This is an example that I've seen before, where my name is in all caps, or I don't even see my first name. Take the time to look at your data and clean it, give it a good scrub, and that cuts across, you know, the way addresses are displayed, zip codes, your hard bounce emails, all of the different things you should be doing to make sure that your data is as pristine as possible. Another idea here on monthly upsells. So this is particularly relevant for folks that are seeing an uptick in donors because of this crisis. As we mentioned, emergency donors are less likely to come back to you. So there's an opportunity when they're in the moment, making a one-time gift to serve up a monthly gift ask instead. As they are processing that donation, we think that's a great strategy to catch them in the moment. And then similarly, for anyone that's giving a one-time gift otherwise for any type of nonprofit, that's also an opportunity to try and positively affect retention by trying to convince would-be one-time donors to reconsider and become monthly. Email deliverability, it's worth a mention here, but I think this is really important as it relates to making sure that your emails get into the inboxes they need to get into now more than ever. So make sure that you take the steps to suppress your inactive file on a regular basis, clean up your hard bounces, deploy a goodbye series to prevent people from emails becoming inactive in the first place. Do all the little things you can do to try and positively affect that. And then the last point here, and I think this is a positive point, is to take steps now to segment and understand the donors that do give to you during this period. Depending upon your mission, I think these kinds of donors represent people that chose you during this crisis when their dollars could have certainly gone elsewhere. And so to that end, our sense would be that those particular people represent a very loyal group of people and folks that you should, handle with care as they continue to give, hopefully, when we get beyond this pandemic. So we wanted to open it up for questions. So I think there are some coming in, and we'll try and get to them with the rest of our time here. So please keep them coming.
Yeah, it looks like the first one is from Sally Heaven. Hi, Sally. What do you recommend for stewardship for donors who give and renew during this period of time? Phone calls from the executive director are great. What about a group Zoom call with small groups of high value donors? I think that's a great idea. I think that, oh, sorry, Dan. I think that those could be very effective and worthwhile touch points at this moment in particular. And I do think that people are craving human interaction. So introducing donors to other donors like them might be a useful way to inspire both engagement as well as opportunities that you might not already think of by crowdsourcing your own great donors and hearing their thoughts at this moment.
Mm-hmm. And I would add to that your program staff are likely have some availability too to hop on some of these webinars too, because they of course are also in lockdown to a degree, right? So there's an opportunity for them to speak on behalf of your mission directly to your donors in this time period. I think that's a wonderful idea.
Yeah, we heard recently about some organizations using their face-to-face canvassers who can't really be on the street making asks right now to make some of those high-touch phone calls and engage people in that way, because those are, your best people. So you can put them to work to engage your constituents. All right. It looks like we don't have any other questions already populated. So I think we can give it one more minute. But if you have any that strike you after we sign off here, please feel free to email us. We will send you the recording to the email address you signed up with. And as we mentioned at the top, Dan and I are with Media Cause and happy to help and talk through this moment. We are offering free office hours to brainstorm with you and talk with you about any different situation you might be facing, whether that's a funding surplus or a shortfall or something we are not thinking of. So please feel free to reach out. Oh, we have one more question. I love sustainers. Is now the time to aggressively try to convert one-time donors to sustainers with a totally appropriate message? Dan, this seems like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love sustainers, absolutely. And I also think depending on the organization, I think there's a really compelling case to be made for a sustaining gift. So in the sense that like you're trying literally to be sustained through this period and beyond, I think is really compelling. Plus it gives the donor an opportunity to give on a budget, which unfortunately there's gonna be a lot of Americans who aren't giving on a budget if they are giving at all. And so in that respect, I also like it. And the last point I'll make on that too, as it relates to match funding and how you might prioritize it, that's a great way to think about prioritizing match funding, because if you're prioritizing it to acquire monthly, that's obviously going to affect your retention in a positive way. Plus, you can leverage it in such a way, for example, like for every monthly donor you acquire, a generous donor might chip in, call it $50. So that way you can acquire a monthly donor for $5 a month and beyond, right? And then also you can get that right now gift and articulate that to the donor. So like you can help us stay with us for the long haul. And when you do so, you'll help generate a gift for us right now that's desperately needed.
Perfect. Well, I think we will go ahead and end this now. But like we mentioned, if you have other questions, please feel free to reach out. And thank you again for joining us today, and let us know how we can help.